Welcome to another episode of Sounds Reasonable. I'm your host, Dr. Brad, and I'm joined in the production of our weekly show by Tim and Tracy. Tracy was ill a couple weeks ago, so Tracy, welcome back. Great to see you.
Good to be here.
We are all members of the Free Thought community, and our Sounds Reasonable website can be found on Facebook. Do you experience frequent irrational thoughts, a pervasive belief in a divine sky daddy, an insatiable urge to read horoscopes, perform spells, speak in tongues, or pray? Fortunately, you are now listening to the cure for these ailments. Sounds Reasonable. This show is dedicated to bringing you, the listener, the latest news in free thought, science, logic and reason, and politics and religion. And of course, we encourage you to share your thoughts with us after each episode by posting comments and asking questions on our Facebook page. What is free thought? What does it mean to be a free thinker? The dictionary definition is a person who forms opinions about religion based on reason, independent of tradition, authority, or established belief. Here's Christopher Hitchens' working definition. Our belief is not a belief. Our principles are not a faith. We do not rely solely upon science and reason because these are necessary rather than sufficient factors, but we distrust anything that contradicts science or outrages reason. We may differ on many things, but what we respect is free inquiry, open-mindedness, and the pursuit of ideas for their own sake. We'll now move on to our science news segment, and remember that the scientific mind is one that allows its perceptions of reality to be constrained by good evidence and good argument. One of the most fundamental questions man has asked through the ages is how the diversity of life on Earth arose. This remained a question largely unanswered until the mid-1800s, when Charles Darwin and Russell Wallace both described evolution by natural selection. Of course, Darwin, because of his book on the origin of species, is the more famous of the two, but both deserve credit for the idea. Tim has an excellent introduction to evolution for us, so Tim, educate our audience on evolution's basic tenets.
Okay, I'm gonna start with just a real quick little slideshow here. So you should see you see the slideshow.
Yes.
Okay. So just want to look at these some pictures here and kind of talk about what we've got going on here. So here we see a leaf-tailed gecko.
Oh, neat.
Okay. Here's a peppered moth, and again, in case you can't see it, there it is.
Wow.
Okay. We have a walking stick insect.
Cool.
We have an owl, and you can see it there. There's the owl.
Wow.
The common barren caterpillar, which is right there on the leaf.
That's cool.
We look at not just external, but if we look internal, we see some forelimb homology in mammals, how they, all those 5 mammals have similar bone structures in their forelimbs. Appendix. Now, of course, our appendix is not functional, but if you look at other mammals, the appendix is highlighted in pink there, you see functional appendixes. But a little difference, and definitely ours, and if you look at a possum. Vestigial, or more vestigial organs. You look at whales, you find vestigial hind legs. Blind cavefish, and so you have the Mexican blind cavefish compared to the surface fish, and then blind salamander, cave salamanders. Notice not just that they're blind, but also look at the differences in pigmentation. You have some things in males versus females. You see this a lot in birds and other animals. There's a major difference between a peacock and a peahen. Fiddler crabs with 1 big claws, right? Look at birds of paradise and all their elaborate courtship dances that they do. And then, of course, we'll end here with Galapagos, Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands, and how each island had a finch that was different on each island. So the question, let me get my, whoops, out of that, sorry. So we're back to live there, right?
Yes.
So the question, how do we explain what we saw in that slideshow? How do we explain those organisms? Or how do we explain that almost all organisms alive today are different from organisms alive in the past? Well, we can explain that in one word: evolution. Evolution is the foundation for understanding the unity and diversity of life. And without that foundation, our understanding of this unity and diversity seen within living organisms would fall apart. So what is evolution? Simply, very general definition is change over time. More of a biological definition, evolution is the process by which the current diversity of life arose from previous life. So what are the processes by which evolution occurs? Evolution can be divided into microevolution and macroevolution. In microevolution, you have small-scale changes in the genetic makeup of population over time. So changes in the traits you see within a population over time. The accumulation of microevolutionary changes within a population can lead to macroevolution, which is the formation of new species, also called speciation. Speciation can be as simple as a group of organisms within a population of organisms diverging because of macroevolutionary events, and thereby becoming a new species. Speciation can also create the great transformations which modern day organisms have evolved from past life forms. For example, the whale, which evolved from an ancestral land-dwelling animal that lived millions of years ago. So if we look at microevolutionary events, what are the things that drive microevolution? One of the major keys is, of course, genetic variation, having variation of genes and traits within a population. And then we can look at selection. Two major types of selection that we see in nature. Natural selection, Wallace and Darwin's theory, where there are certain traits that are seen within a population of organisms that will give that organism a survival advantage within that environment. So they survive long enough or longer and mate more and potentially pass on those good survival genes to their offspring. But you also have sexual selection. And like with the peacock and peahen and the fiddler crabs and the birds of paradise, there are certain traits that produce a reproductive advantage. And it leads to what we'd call non-random mating. And so it's mate selection based on these traits. And these traits may be detrimental as far as natural selection, but because they're perceived as good genes for mating, those traits survive and get passed on and actually get exaggerated into those big claws and large tail feathers. Then we also have artificial selection, which has been selective breeding of plants and animals has been going on for a long, long time. And now we could even throw in our biotechnology, genetically modified organisms. We're selecting specific traits that we want to have in offspring of organisms. Some other factors that lead to microevolutionary events, of course, genetic drift. We have changes in the gene pool of a population because of chance. And it could be because of loss of organisms and loss of genes, or it could just be because of, non-random mating, sexual selection events, or just by even random mating and just the chance of you have a loss or lessening of genetic diversity, which again can lead to evolution, especially in smaller populations, when that happens in smaller populations. Of course, mutations bring about new genes, which may bring about potentially new genetic traits that could be an advantage and lead to those things you see, like the gecko that look like the leaves, right? And then gene flow, where new organisms move into a population, bring in their new genetics, and reproduce and pass those on into that population. So that's just a real quick kind of evolution crash course for you all.
Thanks so much, Tim. Well done, and that should help our audience get going with our related story here. So the story I'm going to relate is from the June 17th issue of Nature of this year. Title of the article is Hard Evidence from Soft Fossil Eggs, and it was authored by Johan Lindgren and Benjamin Keir. Now, before I get to the article, I just want to briefly go through the anatomy of the typical reptile bird egg. So Tim, if I could have the first figure, please. Okay, so as this figure shows, modern day eggs of a few reptiles and all birds are composed of a hard calcareous shell. That is a shell made up of calcium. Okay, and I think most everyone's aware of that. Then immediately inside is what we refer to as albumin, but commonly you would think of this as the egg white. Okay, so you can envision cracking open an egg, you get the yolk and then the white surrounding it, so the albumin is the egg white. And then further internal to that is a membrane known as the chorion. Okay, and so the chorion is involved in gas exchange for the developing embryo. Then the amnion surrounds the embryo itself. And that's where the name, the amniotic egg, comes from, is the presence of this membrane. And that membrane is necessary to prevent the drying out of the egg itself, of the developing embryo. And then we also have the allantois. And the allantois is a storage compartment for waste, as well as assisting in the exchange of oxygen for the developing embryo. Okay, so on with the article. The appearance of the amniotic egg marks a key event in the evolutionary history of vertebrates. Its major advantage, again, is the amnion, which we just described. And this is an enclosing membrane that prevents the embryo from drying out, and the principal feature to which the amniotic egg owes its name. Another crucial development was the addition of a tough outer shell that provides protection and mechanical support. This allowed the first reptiles to colonize terrestrial environments more than 300 million years ago and paved the way for the rise of birds and mammals. Now, because hard-shelled calcareous eggs, like those of birds, are reinforced by crystalline calcium carbonate, they are well represented in the fossil record. By contrast, soft-shelled eggs, such as those of most lizards and snakes, have leathery outer coverings that decay rapidly and thus are only rarely preserved. Now, writing in Nature, Norell et al. And Legendry et al. Describe multi-million-year-old soft-shelled eggs that might alter the prevailing view of dinosaur reproduction and possibly also change current thinking about ancient marine reptiles. Since their earliest documentation in 1859, that's a good year, by the way, that was when Origin of Species came out by Charles Darwin. Dinosaur eggs and eggshells have been found almost worldwide and occasionally even include the remains of associated embryos. Discoveries indicating communal nesting and brooding have also revealed the antiquity of bird-like parenting behaviors in dinosaurs. Yet, despite research shedding light on the biochemistry and coloration of fossil eggs, the known diversity of egg-laying dinosaurs is still limited to only a few groups, including the gigantic sauropods, carnivorous theropods, and duck-billed hadrosaurs. Moreover, most dinosaur eggs are geologically rather young, being derived from rocks of Cretaceous age, the last and longest period of the Mesozoic era lasting from about 145 million to 66 million years ago. It's worth noting at this point that about 64 million years ago was the end of the age of the dinosaurs. That's when we had the meteor catastrophe that led to their demise. Now, given that modern crocodiles and birds lay hard-shelled eggs, the conventional assumption has been that their close ancient relatives, the dinosaurs, must have likewise produced eggs that had calcareous shells, although this is at odds with the puzzling variety of shell microstructures evident between different dinosaur groups. Norell and colleagues now propose that such anatomical inconsistencies arose because calcareous eggs evolved independently at least 3 times in dinosaurs, and in each instance might have developed from a different type of ancestral soft-shelled egg. Norell et al. Base their conclusions on microstructural and organochemical data obtained from non-calcareous fossil eggs containing embryos of the sauropod-like dinosaur Eusaurus from the late Triassic period. So that's about 227 to 209 million years ago. And the horned dinosaur Protoceratops from the late Cretaceous, on the order of 84 to 72 million years ago. Now, the author's computer-generated evolutionary models also suggest that the scarcity of dinosaur eggs excavated from the pre-Cretaceous, that is older than 145 million years, rocks probably reflects the poor preservation potential of parchment-like eggshell. Furthermore, because soft-shelled eggs are sensitive to both desiccation and physical deformation, it seems reasonable to speculate that they were laid and then buried in moist soil or sand and relied on external incubation, such as heat derived from decomposing plant matter rather than a brooding parent. Unlike dinosaurs, mosasaurs, an extinct family of aquatic lizards, and other Mesozoic marine reptiles, such as the dolphin-like Ichthyosaurus and long-necked plesiosaurs. And plesiosaurs, by the way, if there is a quote-unquote Loch Ness monster, would be the most likely candidate, although I don't want our listeners to think that there's any evidence whatsoever for the Loch Ness monster. There is not. But anyway, the plesiosaurs are usually considered to have given birth to live young, a reproductive strategy termed viviparity. However, this opinion might now be about to change too. Legendry and colleagues report their discovery of a fossil egg about the size of a football from a latest Cretaceous, again about 68 million years ago, nearshore marine setting on what is today Seymour Island off Antarctica. The authors named their fossil egg specimen Antarcticulithus. Thought that was kind of cool. Oh, sorry. After the Antarctic continent and the ancient Greek words for egg and stone. Antarcticulithus is among the largest eggs ever recorded, being rivaled in volume only by some non-avian dinosaurs and the extinct Madagascan elephant bird. Notably, however, these other egg types are characterized by thick calcareous shells, whereas Antarcticulithus has a thin and presumably original soft covering. Although cautiously pointing out that no embryonic remains were found in the fossil eggs, Legendry et al. Hypothesized that it might have been laid by a giant marine reptile, and perhaps most feasibly a mosasaur, on the basis of structural similarities to the leathery eggs of lepidosaurs. The group that includes mosasaurs, living lizards, snakes, amphibian. I can't think of the term, so I'm just going to call them the burrowing worm lizards. If you can think of what those, if you've ever seen
Worm
pictures.
lizards, gotcha.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The worm lizards and the lizard-like tuatara.
Give a
Okay.
fixed word.
Furthermore, because mosasaurs had streamlined bodies and thus were unable to move on land, Legendre and colleagues proposed that egg laying must have taken place under some depth of water. Nevertheless, although modern viviparous lizards certainly give birth to fully developed young that are surrounded by thin coverings, mainly extraembryonic membranes, the few known fossils of pregnant mosasauroids, again the group containing mosasaurs and their ancestors, have not been found associated with eggshell debris. Crucially, mosasaurs were also air breathers. Therefore, laying a soft-shelled egg underwater would have entailed a considerable risk of drowning for the emerging newborn. So identifying the elusive producer of Antarcticulithus egg becomes even more intriguing given the findings of Norell et al., which could implicate some form of dinosaur as the proud parent. Indeed, the total estimated weight of Antarcticulithus clearly approaches those of the largest non-avian dinosaur in bird eggs, and both these groups have a history of fossil occurrence in Antarctica, which is something that a lot of people aren't aware of. You find dinosaur fossils in Antarctica, and of course, if you understand the continental drift, you know why. Dinosaur parentage thus at least seems plausible for Antarcticulithus, which might have been laid on land and then washed out to sea as a discarded eggshell. This could have remained buoyant for some time because of trapped air before finally sinking to the sea floor, where it was buried in sediment and eventually fossilized. Let us hope that future discoveries of similarly spectacular fossil eggs with intact embryos will solve this thought-provoking enigma. So, as things sit today, I would guess that the largest egg out there would be an ostrich egg or some of the other flightless birds. Have any of you ever actually seen or held an ostrich egg?
I've seen them, but I have not held them.
I've actually held one. We had an ostrich raiser in this area for a while, and one of our students brought one in. Yeah, just for the benefit of our listeners, how many cells make up that huge ostrich egg, Tim? Do you know?
I know. One.
One. Very good.
I passed.
I wasn't gonna make Tracy or our guest take a guess at that one. So
Thank you.
But that's a cool trick. You can win a beer or two at the bar with that one. If you remember that an ostrich egg
I'll be back.
Just one. Okay, so that's pretty amazing actually.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it looks like the earlier dinosaurs were more involved in the parentage role than the later ones, which is somewhat interesting. So any comments? What do you think?
That was pretty fascinating to me. I used to breed crested geckos, and I loved like handling the eggs and watching them move and everything, and I could pretty much tell when they were about ready to hatch. So I would set a little camera up so that I could watch them, break out of there. I don't know. It was pretty neat to me.
Yeah, it is. And of course, everyone, well, I shouldn't say everyone, but certainly a large number of people have seen Jurassic Park, and they can envision the scene where the dinosaurs hatching in the lab there. And it is rather similar to that. They'll have a so-called egg tooth and start cracking through the shell and then emerge.
Sometimes I would have a little bit of a hard time, and CPR does not work on lizards. I'm just letting you know. That doesn't work.
You sure you plugged the nostrils when you gave mouth to mouth?
I thought so, but didn't happen.
Would you speculate that probably if they're going to find more, it's probably going to have to be in Antarctica? I mean, where else would there be an environment where they're preserved? Could you envision any other place?
Right. That's something we have to remember, though. Of course, the environment was not like that at the time those eggs were laid. Mm-hmm. So Antarctica at that point would have been part of Australia and Australia and South America. So it would have been a much warmer climate at that time.
Right. And just having to have the right conditions again to preserve that. So you just wonder, what are the areas on Earth that you might be able to find those?
Right, and that's of course a challenge in general for soft-bodied animals, tissues, etc. Is trying to find fossil evidence of them.
Yep.
There are very few that have survived, simply because they can't be readily fossilized like bone-containing animals or structures can.
Right.
Yeah. So if I could have the last figure, Tim. Okay. So I'm sure all of us have heard this at one time or another. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? And if you look at the bottom of that figure, eggs already existed well before birds and chickens.
What?
And so our soft-shelled eggs would be the earliest forms, and then that would subsequently give rise to the calcareous eggs. Now, I didn't know this before I started researching this for the show today, but some turtles do lay calcareous eggs. The majority are soft-shelled, but some do produce calcareous eggs. So there is some, shall we say, advancement within the group that we call turtles. Then almost all of your lizards and snakes lay soft-shelled. But your crocodiles and birds lay calcareous. Okay, so it's for that reason that it was thought that, well, dinosaurs must have all laid calcareous, but no, that's not the case. Okay, so the next time a creationist asks you which came first, the chicken or the egg, I hope all of us will answer the dinosaur. All right. Any final points on that before we take a short break here?
Good.
Okay, we'll be right back with Sounds Reasonable in a moment.
Everything that brought me alive. But we're all like monsters, playing with the monsters. They brought me alive, but got no alibi. It's a lover's fight without an alibi. Took my innocence without an alibi.
we're back on July 12th, 2020 with More Sounds Reasonable. Almost all of us who consider ourselves to be free thinkers went through a process where we had to discard or shake off our old belief system. Now, I know exactly when that happened for me and why, but some people may not be able to be so precise. Today, we have a special guest with us who has consented to allow his journey towards non-belief to be disclosed. Tate, welcome to Sounds Reasonable.
Hi, Brad. How you doing?
Doing well. Nice to see you. Well, I guess I will take the first question. So, Tate, where do you find yourself today on the viewpoint of the existence of a god or gods or the supernatural in general?
Would I be wrong if I said, I hope there is one?
Of course not. There's
I mean,
no right or wrong answer here. We're interested in your honest opinion. So,
as you said, it's a journey, Brad. And I grew up a devout Catholic growing up, and I was the altar boy. I even wanted to be a priest at one point when I was a kid. I knew the sacraments. I could perform them by the time I was 10 years old. And I guess, as you said, I have no idea where along the line. I don't have a complete disbelief, but I have more of a rational outlook at the whole theology, ideology. And I guess what I believe right now is there's possibly something out there. I hope there is a God. Sometimes I talk to him. But for the most part, I look at everything from a scientific view and from a rational view, and I just can't prove it to myself. So I'm pretty much on the fence. You see what I'm saying?
sure, absolutely. Yep,
That's where I'm at. And I think part of that, too, along my journey to where I'm at right now, is the fact that I find more, what's the word I'm looking for? Confidence in the belief that there's a God than I do in man's interpretation of a God. I guess you could say I looked at the whole thing and I just went, I'm done with organized religion. Just the way they treat everybody. Everybody's got their own view and everybody else is wrong. So I just went, y'all can have that, and I'm going to do my own thing.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, I was going to say that's kind of where, my question is, how do we handle, how you rationalize, again, just the wide view and the wide beliefs and how, again, if we look at the United States and the government in certain areas, certain groups believing that, okay, this one Christianity, this one religious thought should be the religious thought of the country, and that goes against how the country was founded on religious freedoms. So I guess, what do you do when someone approaches you about that, or how do you rationalize you not believing what they believe, I guess?
I see, not every, it can't be just one right.
Right.
I don't believe in man's ability to interpret the word of God. I don't believe really in man's ability at all half the time. If you look at the way some of the things are, being run right now, it's because man is selfish. I'll put it that way. They want to take things and apply them to their worldview. They don't want to take their worldview and look at how things are done and readjust. You see that with anybody who denies science all the time. And they don't want to do that with, they want to do it with religion. Everybody has their own, even in Christianity. How many different types of Christianity are there right now? How many different sects of Christianity and offshoots and everything? Nobody can agree on anything. To me, for the part of me that believes in God, it believes in honor, truth, love, morals, that sort of thing. And it's just as easy as that. Don't muddy it up with God hates gays, or God thinks you need to do this, or God, because my particular belief says so. I just don't believe in man's ability to do God adequate justice. I guess I don't know how else to put it.
And it's almost like, if you look at it, if you're thinking of a higher power, and it's almost maybe going back to how Native Americans and other cultures, honor the earth, the sun, those nature, and how it's God or your higher power is nature, is part of nature, which you're part of. So
You're absolutely right. Spiritualism is a huge aspect of any religion. And I've looked at a lot of different religions. I've studied some Buddhism. I've studied Christianity. I've looked at all sorts of different ways of looking at this. And I think maybe that's kind of where I'm at right now, is there's an innate spiritualism because I want to believe in all those things and everything working together. As you said, the Indians used to worship the sun and the sky, and everything was in harmony for them. They didn't waste anything. And I just wish it could be that way. But I look at the way, again, organized religion is run, and everybody's selfish and self-serving. So again, to me, I hope there's a God. I'm kind of on the fence because I look at the universe and I look at the way things run from a scientific view, and I want rational explanations for everything, and I know there is one. I don't want to be those volcano worshipers from the past who, just because they didn't know why, they invented a God,
Sure.
So that's where I'm kind of on the fence right now. I want to believe, but I need some proof somewhere along the line, which will never come if the Bible's to be trusted until I die.
That's what I was going to ask you about. How do you feel about the Bible?
Are you asking if I think it's the Word of God or if I think it's a bunch of nice stories?
Both of those.
I don't believe it's the direct Word of God. Again, man got involved, and I think they made it the way they wanted it to be. And now it sounded good to them to further their own agendas, for lack of better words. But I do think it's a great source of finding a way to live your life. If you look at the New Testament with love and the way you treat others. And of course, the amendments, which should be innate ideals for anyone who's a decent human being to begin with. But as far as God directed those words through a man's arm into a pen, no, I don't think so.
Okay.
And it's contradictory in a lot of spots, especially Old Testament versus New Testament. Have you read the Bible?
Yes.
Any of you guys?
Yes.
Not
You've
all
read
of
the
it.
Bible. It's like all hate and anger, and then along came Jesus. What? And I had a hard time reading through the Old Testament, especially Numbers. Oh my God!
Like
account for everything. It was just like what was it, about 18 pages of telling people how to count things?
Isn't it Old Testament, New Testament, kind of like bad cop, good cop?
Yeah, exactly.
But
But maybe that's God's way of looking down and giving you two different sides of parenting.
Yeah, now one thing I've noticed is we've been having our conversation, Kate, is that you indicate that I want to believe, and that's that is an interesting route to take, but it's a bit antithetical to wanting a rational view of the world. Now, maybe you have a different definition for belief than I do, but for me, belief is accepting something in the absence of evidence. So I try very hard to avoid using that I believe in something. I'd say, well, there's evidence for this, or I can mathematically show this is possible and this isn't. But I try very hard to avoid belief. So how would you define belief for yourself?
For me, it's the same as you. You said it perfectly. Belief is being able to trust and know in your heart that that's something with an absence of evidence, as you said. Just like the volcano worshipers, I see things all the time, and we all do, that we can't exactly explain.
Mm-hmm.
I want to think it happened for a reason. I want to think there was a guiding hand. As a human, I'm not going to lie. I've got some self-serving in me too. I want, we all do. It's just part of being serving. But being rational is overcoming that too. So I want to believe, and I'll hope that it's some kind of guidance until I see evidence. I will look for that evidence. I will hope I find that evidence. but I'll take comfort in not knowing and maybe thinking sometimes that, there have been a lot of times where I should have probably shuffled off this mortal coil because of stupid mistakes I've made in life, or for whatever reason, at the last second, something happened and I was safe and sound. You can go into the basic physics of everything, and everything has a causation effect, and something that might have happened 10 minutes earlier led to that point and saved me. Or I can just walk away going, glad my angel is looking over me. You know what I'm saying? I don't have to go find the reason. I'm just happy I'm not dead.
So when you go to work and you get all green lights straight through,
You're running late. You're running late.
could be this, could be that, made it on time.
Crazy.
Nah, maybe not that situation. That's probably my subconscious working, going, all right, if I leave at 7:48 and I hit this at this exact time and I'm doing 26 miles per hour and it's not icy. Done. Green lights all the way through. Yeah.
All the way through.
So
But you all, none of you believe in God.
Yeah,
I
don't. Yeah, so, but I have to qualify that a little bit because as a scientist, I have to freely admit that I cannot prove that there isn't one.
Right.
Okay, and so therefore, I don't know if you're familiar with the Dawkins scale, if you've ever read any of Richard Dawkins' work. But anyway, he has a scale with 1 being I 100% believe in God, and 7 being there absolutely is no God, and I rank myself as 6.9. So, so that's where I am, because again, there's simply no direct physical testable evidence. And in the absence of evidence like that, I'm very skeptical of anything. And so, and I can point to a science example. The hypothesis that there is a multiverse. I don't know if you're familiar with that. But anyway, that this isn't just the only universe that we're living in, but there are literally an infinite number, or close to an infinite number of universes out there. And there's mathematical modeling that says that, but has there been any evidence, physical testable evidence? And the answer is no. And so I remain very skeptical of that particular idea, even though there are a number of very good physicists that will tell me that, yeah, that most likely is the case.
And we may have the tools to prove it someday down the future.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. And that's the other key, is something testable, so that in itself, tells you that you are probably on a right track for a reasonable stance, as opposed to if something is just out of hand claimed, such as, for example, that if you think about the progression, I don't want to divert too far because we're going to have to move on here, but just quickly, if you think about the way in which gods have evolved, shall we say. So at first they were actually physical entities in the earth. Okay, so you had gods of the river, gods of the sky, gods of the mountains, etc. Then once man conquered those, now God moved to the sky. Okay, and then we of course were able to get into space. So now the claim is that God is beyond time and space. Well, what does that even mean? That now becomes fully untestable. And so as a result, in my view, we've reached the end point, less something that we just simply haven't imagined yet. Which again is that 0.1 that I leave myself between 6.9 and 7. So any last points, guys, before we thank Tate?
Good.
Tate, thanks
think
so
I'll go
very
just-
much for sharing your views with us. And hey, let's not make it so long before we see each other again, all right?
To
Absolutely.
meet you.
Yes.
All
You
right.
too. Thank you, guys.
Thanks much,
Thank
Tate.
you.
Take care.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Okay, we'll be right back after this short break.
Messing with my head again. You had your heart set on me, but these feels they come and go, and they come so easily. Tell me what it is about you that I can't forget, but you're breaking down my walls again just to set me free. Why do I, baby? Why do I love the way you always leave me? Why do I, baby? Why do I love the touch but never love the feeling? Why do I, baby? Why do I love the way you always leave me? Why do I, baby? Why do I love the touch but never love the feeling?
And we're back with more Sounds Reasonable. The White House Coronavirus Task Force has been out of public view as President Donald Trump has shown an urgency to move past the pandemic, downplay recent surges in COVID cases in some states, and get Americans back to work. But the nation's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has been warning Americans about the risk of further spread of the virus. He also defended the stay-at-home orders as having saved millions of lives and drew attention to anti-science bias and the disproportionate impact the virus is having on the Black community. Fauci said anti-science bias in the country can be problematic. However, that eminent scientific expert, Franklin Graham, son of Billy Graham, disagrees. Tim has the story. So, Tim, why does Dr. Graham disagree?
Thanks, Dr. Brad. Yeah, my story comes from the LGBTQ Nations Bias Watch. And this story could easily fit in as our crazy story of the day, but Tracy has our number one cray-cray story coming up next. The title of this article, Franklin Graham attacks Anthony Fauci because, quote, science isn't truth, God is. So again, as Dr. Brad mentioned, many of you already know Franklin Graham, son of evangelical preacher Billy Graham, is also an evangelical leader and a vehement Trump worshiper. Now, bear in mind that Franklin Graham, unlike his father, is not actually a minister. I think Franklin is kind of the last supporter of the theory of acquired characteristics. Since his father was since his father was an evangelical minister, he thinks through genetic inheritance, he too is a minister. And again,
Sounds legit.
yeah, so some of you may not realize the theory of acquired characteristics was long since debunked as a theory where it was believed that the ability to acquire a trait that you acquired during your lifetime could be passed on to your offspring. So if I learned to play the guitar, then all my offspring could play the guitar too, as we know true. Anyway, Graham is taken to Facebook to denounce Anthony Fauci for speaking about anti-science bias that has been fomenting on the right for years now. It seems that what really chapped Graham's ass, to use Grandpa Hagee's famous saying, was a podcast where Fauci was asked why so many people had taken issue with the coronavirus precautions. Fauci pointed out to the religious right's attack on scientific facts, anti-vaccination types, and Donald Trump supporters' distrust of distrust of authority figures. So he called him out on that. Quote, one of the problems we face in the United States is that unfortunately, there is a combination of anti-science bias that people are, for reasons that sometimes are, inconceivable and not understandable. They don't believe science and they don't believe authority, Fauci said. Fauci went on to say, when they see someone up in the White House, which has an air of authority to it, who's talking about science, that there are some people who just don't believe that. And that's unfortunate because, science is truth. Well, I guess Graham took exception to Fauci's statement. Graham is quoted in an article, in the article, quote, this week, Dr. Anthony Fauci made the statement that science is truth. Really? I would beg to differ. Science may be a quest for truth, but it is certainly fallible. Graham posted, I am not against science, of course, but we know that scientists often disagree. And here is Graham's example for that. He said, quote, as an example, the early Empirical College London coronavirus model has since been proven wrong, and disputes continue today between the experts about the model used more recently in the US. And man did not evolve from apes or tadpoles, as scientists say. That's just not true. God created man and woman as the Bible says, unquote. So it seems that Graham doesn't understand the beauty of science. And the beauty of science is that it is constantly evolving, and as new facts emerge, what is believed can change. So Graham is further quoted as saying, if America has an anti-science bias, as the doctor said in his interview, it might be because we aren't sure whether to trust those who are presenting their science to us. Graham continued, quote, Dr. Fauci first told the American people they didn't need to wear face masks. Then he reversed himself to say that we did. Then he revealed the reason for that he said that initially was because there was a shortage of face masks. So the facts changed to avoid a run on face masks. That's not good steps toward building trust. And that's when Franklin declared in his post that science is truth, science isn't truth, God is truth. It's hard for me to say that science isn't truth because we all know science is truth. Anyway, but Graham regularly does distort the actual truth. And of course, he distorted what Fauci had said about the mask. And factcheck.org has flagged the claim and noted that it was false. His claim was false. In an interview with Dr. John LaPook, chief medical correspondent for CBS News, Fauci made it clear he wasn't opposed to people wearing masks in public. But at the time, there was a national shortage, and nurses and doctors were making their own masks out of plastic and fabric, while hoarders and people looking to make a quick buck bought up all the supply of masks. And so that's really what he said. So I'll leave you with the immortal words of the water boy. You're wrong, Franklin Graham. Science is the search for truth.
Yeah, that's again. Well, first of all, you have to actually want to know whether or not what you're saying is right or wrong. And Franklin Graham, in my view, could care less. Yeah. He's only interested in promoting his particular brand of religion and Christianity out there. Mm-hmm. And that's the only thing he's ever been interested in, because that's how he makes money.
Right.
Let's face it. So.
and well, again, it's just another case where not wanting to know, but then of course not knowing how science works. And of course, in this situation with a novel virus, there's going to be just tons of things that we don't know, and tons of things that we have to learn as we go along. So things are going to change, and that's the beauty of science, is as we learn more, this now isn't quite right, so we change it based on the new evidence. That's
Yeah,
how it works.
that's absolutely right. And at some point, we'll do a show just on science, its principles, tenets, how it works, so that our listeners will be up to speed on that, because it is so important. And I know in my couple of my classes anyway, I would always start out by doing that. So when I taught my evolution course, I started out that way, and then when I taught scientific communication, I would do it that way. So yeah, that's so important, and it's really too bad, so to speak, that our general public is so far behind in that understanding. So, Tracy, any comments on Tim's story there?
Not that I can think of. It was very interesting.
Okay, so we'll be right back with our crazy story of the week after another short break.
I'm feeling so hollow. Don't you know? Don't you know? I'm living in shadow. Don't you know? Don't you know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? You were fool's gold. Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
And it's most people's favorite time of our show, the crazy story of the week. James Orson Baker, born January 2nd, 1940, is an American televangelist, entrepreneur, and convicted fraudster. He hosted the television program The PTL Club with his then wife Tammy Faye from 1974 to 1989. He also developed Heritage USA, a now defunct Christian theme park in Fort Mill, South Carolina. In the late 1980s, Baker resigned from the ministry over a cover-up of hush money to church secretary Jessica Hahn. You know, I'd forgotten all about her actually till I did the background research here, for an alleged rape. Subsequent revelations of accounting fraud brought about felony charges, conviction, imprisonment, and divorce. Baker later remarried and returned to televangelism, founding Morningside Church in Blue Eye, Missouri. Apparently that also goes into Arkansas, Tracy. I don't know if you've ever heard of Blue Eye, Arkansas, but anyway. He hosts the Jim Baker Show, which focuses on the end times and the second coming of Christ while promoting emergency survival products, which he just happens to sell. He has written several books, including I Was Wrong, which he should wear a t-shirt wearing that, by the way, having that on there, and Time Has Come, How to Prepare for Epic Events Ahead. Incredibly, after all that, he has been able to reestablish his televangelist ministry. But that is the evangelical Christian mindset, forgiveness and redemption. Now, from his televangelist stage, Baker is sending out a warning to his followers. Tracy has the story. So, Tracy, what is our good buddy Jim saying now?
All right, I love this story. It's from thebiznews.org from July the 1st. Baker, if Trump isn't reelected, a transgender will teach your son anal sex. And this might be a conflict of interest because I don't know if I should do the story because a transgender taught me anal sex. So this might be a conflict of interest. I mean, we've all been there. We've all been there. Anyway, jokes aside, the story is as follows. As President Donald Trump is faced with daily scandals and is slipping in the polls, evangelical Christians are scrambling to bolster his support. According to former televangelist Tim Baker, it was essential that Trump was reelected. Trump must be reelected, said Baker. God sees we are moving in the right way and returning to the Lord. If the liberals take over, they will destroy all our progress. Before you know it, a transgender will be teaching your son anal sex in high school. Does that mean at the high school or while he's in high school? I'm not totally clear on that. In spite of his
all the teachers will become transgender.
Right?
Dave also have to take up that one, I guess.
Does that like, I don't know. Anyway, in spite of his disastrous presidency and scandalous personal life, many Christians think a Trump victory is essential. Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council, recently held a meeting with fellow fundies and urged them to support Trump, according to the Right Wing Watch. Perkins encouraged listeners to text FRC with a request for a list of Trump administration accomplishments. This is something that you can share with your friends because there are those that are not going to see this because media is not going to report it, Perkins said. And there are those that are going to get hung up in the personalities and the tweets and those other things, said Right Wing Watch. A recent Pew poll showed that the majority of Christians still support Trump. Roughly 7 in 10 white evangelical Protestants, 72%, say they approve of the way Trump is handling his job, according to a Pew Research Center survey conducted June 16th to the 22nd. That is a 6 percentage point drop from the 78% reported in April, in line with the 5% drop in that period among U.S. adults overall. The share of white evangelicals who say they very strongly approve of Trump's performance is now at 59%, down 8 points from 67% in April. Pew Research Center also asked the presidential approval question in March of this year, at which time Trump's rating was similar to results obtained in April, according to a Pew Research Center news release. So that talked very briefly about the anal sex, but it was kind of the hook, right? What do you guys think about that? We've all been there.
Well, I don't know if I can say that.
Oh my goodness.
And more just scare tactics. And worked in the homophobia scare, transgender scare, tactics. And teachers. I throw it in with teachers. So all
You
your
gotta bring it to light somehow, guys.
all your teachers now will be transgender or cross-dressers and teaching anal sex. I'm not sure. Fortunately, I would have to say I'm not endorsed in that, so I wouldn't have to teach that. I'm not qualified to.
We have to learn somehow.
There are videos.
There's YouTube.
Yes, imagine there are quite a few videos.
I've been told.
Send me a link. Okay. After the show.
Oh, it's a sad thing when the best thing you can say about somebody is that they're getting older.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
man.
think that's the best thing I can say about Jim Baker. He's getting older. Boy, and he has aged. Thank goodness. They're finding something to slow it down, or something to speed it up.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely right. I agree with Tim that this is just another scare tactic being attempted by somebody who, quite frankly, should be in prison. I mean, there's,
Sure.
he should not be allowed to be running around making money. But like I said, this is the typical mindset that you get with this group. Is they literally love forgiveness and redemption, and they especially love it for their leaders who almost always need it.
Right.
Right.
What was it? That was Ted Haggard, right? The guy that got caught having homosexual affairs with what's that online deal? Grindr.
Oh, no, I didn't hear about that. I missed out that.
Had solicited a guy from Grindr. And then himself was a meth addict on top of it, and here he was running this, hundreds of millions of dollars a year mega church out of Colorado Springs. Yeah, that's the other thing that just drives me nuts is the amount of money that these Nimrods managed to pull in. But anyway, that's not my money.
That's a whole issue you see with the televangelists and others, where they in these mega churches, where they prey upon these people, and they convince these people to send them money, and it could be people that can't afford to be sending them money, and they're getting duped.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I forget who it was just recently. Was might have been Pat Robertson or one of those guys, but said, "Hey, please send. Make sure you send me your stimulus check."
Right.
Exactly.
Yep.
Oh wow. Well, I got one heck of a good laugh.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
Remember that. We've all been there. Oh.
Well, Tracy, thanks so very much. That truly belongs in our crazy story of the week category. That will wrap us up for this week. If you enjoyed our program, please pass the word to your friends and associates, believers and non-believers alike. Again, just a reminder that you are welcome to post questions and comments on our Facebook page. Remember, there is a big difference between having good reasons for what one accepts to be true and having bad ones. Incidentally, this is the only distinction one needs to become a strict atheist. This has been Dr. Brad for Tracy and Tim saying so long.
Yeah.
Bye.